Hello, Sea Wolves! Sorry for a 2-day hiatus, but I had to travel a bit to get my voting pass because tomorrow it's election day here in Holland. And well, you know, as long as you're living in a democracy, I think you should use the privilege. So I had to take some time off to get to the very little village that I'm from to actually get my paper so that I can actually vote tomorrow. But let's dive straight in. Of course, before we do that, I hope that you have something delicious in your perhaps official Sea Wolf mug available below the video. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Cheers.
It's draw time. 1, 2, 3, zoom.
Delicious. And of course, so we have the winners in the Imoca class. I'm a little bit proud actually, because if we look at the top 5 here, we see, of course, oh sorry, I have to, I'm in the class 40 here, should switch to the Imocas. So we have Thomas Ruyant, Morgan Lagraviere in 1, a boat that I talked about in my original top 5 to watch. We have Paprex Arkea, which is also a boat I talked about in my top 5. Then we have For the Planet, Sam Goodgiles and Anthony Koch. I did not mention them, so my bad there. Charal, of course, in 4, also one of them that I mentioned, and kind of my, yeah, how do you say it, ace in the hole, one of the boats that I thought was one to watch, but I wasn't quite sure how they were going to do. And Samantha actually made it till the 5th place. So actually I got 4 out of 5 good in my original top 5. And interestingly, actually the other 2 boats that I mentioned was Militia and Vendee Globe, who are 7th and 8th. So the only one kind of well, wild out of their boat that appeared is teamwork.net, who actually managed to carve out the 6th place. So the finish was really excited. Of course, also the distance between Charal and Innitiatives ceaur 20 minutes, so really close racing, really awesome precision on their part. And interesting to see that yeah, you have to really give it to teamwork.net. I would almost sort of, if there was a prize for like the most you know, bravely run race, I'd give it to them, because the choice that they made to take the more northwestern route took them from presumably maybe place like 18 or 19 or something like that to actual 6th position, you know, taking a much harder upwind race. They weren't in the sunny Caribbean weather like the rest of the fleet, and I guess they got a beautiful result. I'm sure that their sponsors are super happy. So well done, Justine Matreau and Julien Villon. And yeah, what does it mean? Well, I think that largely, because I also kind of named it, right? Like if you were a betting person, it would have been good to watch my first show where I named this top 5, because you would have done well. And it is not completely unexpected. I think the one lesson that we really can take from this race, for me at least, is that the participation in the ocean race, so although Militia of course did really well, and of course Samantha Davis also, although she didn't really participate in the entire ocean race, she did do one leg on board of one of the other boats, so she did get that experience. Pip Hare did also. There were a few, I think Thomas Richon also was on board at some, Johan Richon was also on board for I think for one leg. So there's definitely some Volvo Ocean experience that kind of translates towards the top 5, right? On the other hand, the only boat that really sort of did well in the ocean race, you know, actually won the thing, the Militia, was actually 11th hour, but Militia was second, so really good result there. But 7th in this particular race, and I think, you know, no visible sign that they were like completely crushing it or anything like that, right? I mean, they had a full around the world lap, so you know you could expect there to be some kind of massive advantage to kind of show in this race where we're all kind of falling back and like, oh wow, they really have found some speed in the boat that nobody else has. And you know, this is of course a different configuration, you know, with just Boris and Will, so they were doing it with a team, so they have to also a little bit, you know, invent things a little bit more again. Maybe on the return race that things will be different. But as for now, no, I would say overwhelming visible impact, let's say, on the race there. Although, you know, let's not underestimate that we left with 4D Imocas, 4-0, and that they actually made it in the top 10. So in that sense, you could say that there's definitely that experience definitely translates to a high place in the class so far. But yeah, anyway, super cool result. I think overall was a genuinely fantastic race, beautiful images, and I think also cool to see, you know, for the first time really the boats that will be racing the Vendee Globe in action. I think one thing also that really stood out for me, I actually got quite a bit some questions about Charal and why, because a lot of people I think were of the opinion that you know, they're gonna really like crush it. And we did see that for the upwind part of the race, they did incredibly well, right? I mean, for those first 3-4 days when everything was upwind, they were really crushing it. They were definitely the highest on the wind at all times. And we saw Thomas Ruyant kind of really trying a lot of things to get ahead, but just kind of failing at it at that point. They kept kind of falling behind. So I do think that one thing that we can kind of maybe carefully conclude is that Charal at this time, and I don't know if that's necessarily due to their unique rudder configuration, right? It could be, but there could also be other factors. It could be the foils, it could be a combination of different things. But I think that they definitely have a bit more of an upwind edge right now, whereas as soon as we turned towards the more downwind sailing, we saw that all of the, you know, recently either heavily modified or new Imocas. I mean, let's be fair, pretty much the entire top 10 is like of the newest boats, which makes sense. I mean, the foils have made a giant leap forward again, and we definitely see that it's giving them a competitive advantage. But I think in the start of the race, we really saw like a bigger advantage on that upwind part for Charal, whereas as soon as we switched to downwind sailing, it's clear that kind of all boats are really competitive with each other, and it was maybe more due to the fact that we had some patchy wind and that some of the boats maybe just got like a little bit more lucky, you know, on top of the considerable skill that they bring to bear. And I think all in all, yeah, it's definitely giving us something to work with and to kind of, you know, guesstimate a little bit more. But since the return race actually involves a lot more upwind sailing also, I'm going to be very curious to see how that stacks up, how Charal will do, you know, especially against Thomas Ruyant in the next race, and if it will be equally close, and if we will see a similar kind of change between the longer upwind sections of the next race and the more downwind parts. So I guess we'll see what happens. Well then, let's hop on to the class 40, because that actually is turning very, very interesting, as you can see here on the map. So we do also see a clear change there, in the sense that they have also chosen kind of a more northern, more western route, and a more, you know, taking the southern trade winds route. And actually, although it hasn't really, I think, fully paid off for everybody, at least the number 1 position here, so that's I think it's, yeah, Group SNEF, have clearly outpaced the kind of the southern group, and I think are now, well, I don't want to jinx anything, but they have about 102, I think, yeah, 103 point something mile lead. And if we look at the wind right now, it looks, you know, like pretty much like rock steady for the next 24 hours. It's not going to, like, there are some light patches, but I think on their particular route they're going to be, you know, kind of okay. I think they're already more or less past the point where it's really going to affect them too much, because they're already kind of like past where it's going to be a real problem. So I think that it's, well, like, you know, things can still happen, but I think in this particular case, so that's opposite of what happened in the Imoca class. I think in this particular case, the northern route, at least for the winner is going to be produced by this choice for the more northwestern route, while I think there's still a pretty good chance of basically Credit Mutual, Allegram-Pirelli to get to the second and third, and maybe IPSA for the fourth place that we see right now. Although of course the upper, that's also still a split, let's say, between the upper course and the lower course. It's quite interesting that we see like number one that's kind of took in the upper course but went more to the middle faster. Then we have number two, which comes from the much more northern course, and we have number three, Allegram-Pirelli, here on the southern course. So it's sort of like a grand test, if you will, from the middle route upperward and southern route, and over the next, well, basically 24 hours we're going to see which of the three is going to have the faster road. And I think the most wind, of course, is definitely going to Allegram-Pirelli, so I wouldn't count them completely out. On the other hand, their leg is about 120-ish miles, which on one day is a lot, right? I mean, Group SNEF is already having a bit lighter wind, so their current speed is about 6 knots, while the rest are doing 13.1 knots and 9 knots, so that's considerably faster. But 100-something knots, you know, to gain 100-something knots, even if you're 3, 4, you know, in a situation now like 5 knots faster, that's still going to take you, you know, like 10 hours or so to kind of get even close to closing that gap. And they have about maybe 24 hours, maybe a little bit more to race. So it's still possible, but it's definitely going to be a razor tight result in that sense. And yeah, so that's basically it for the race update for today. Now, I know some of you entered in the comments that in the last episode I said that I'll show you something kind of cool for the Sunday, but I didn't have time for that because we needed to air the show, and unfortunately the sound didn't get recorded when I recorded that particular part. So I'll include it in this show. So this was kind of intended to give you guys like a nice interesting Sunday, but it's still a lot of fun. So if you have some time this week to dive into this, it's kind of unrelated to sailing, but it's kind of interesting. So if you follow me in here, we're going to go a little bit on the tangent here, but if you follow me, this will be, you know, like it's a little bit of like a thinking thing. It will be kind of interesting. So if you follow me here, you will see that we're zooming in. You're thinking, Floor, where are you going with this? We're zooming in on the Suez Canal. So this here, what I'm looking down at, is the famous Suez Canal, and it's famous for being the longest straight line canal in the world. It's about 120 kilometers. Now you can see that's actually not completely straight, right? There are some obvious you know, bends in it, but you know, for the Guinness Book of Records, it is the longest canal in the world. And if we kind of zoom in on this, you're thinking, Florian, where are you going with this? Trust me, it's going to get interesting. So we can see an oil tanker here, and it's, you know, it's quite large, as you can see, and you can kind of see some trees here also on the side of the canal. And I just want you to take in this picture for example, for scale, to kind of give you an idea of, you know, what a canal looks like, right? Now, most canals in the world are actually not this wide, right? They don't have to accommodate big tankers. They're usually about 40 meters or so. That's kind of the average for most canals in the world. That's interesting to know. Now, what's also kind of interesting to know is that canals in such, because they're an invention, right? They're a human invention. They're kind of a big thing that humans do, and apparently we've been doing it for a very long time, because actually the first mention of a canal ever is given to us, whether you believe it or not, by Plato. So Plato is actually the first person who described that many thousands of years ago, that actually in his Atlantis story, that Atlantis was basically a huge city with lots of canals, a huge circular city, and we don't really know like how old this was or when this was. Some people estimate it be like something like 13,000 years ago. And of course, it's never really found, right? We don't even know if it's actually a real place. But I want to kind of show you guys something interesting here, right? So I'm going to zoom in kind of slowly here. And then at some point you might see something. And obviously we're kind of zooming into, well, it's kind of the Sahara desert here, which is of course an interesting point in itself. But if you look here, you can see kind of like a straightish line, right? And I know that a lot of really smart people are watching sea wolves actually. So I want to kind of show you this and see what you think about it. So you can see there's kind of like a village, like a farm here. There's some trees growing, and you can quite clearly see that here there is a dried canal, right? You can see some trees here on the side. You can actually here see some trees actually kind of growing in you know, what obviously once were walls to a canal, and probably there's still some water, maybe some groundwater going over the rock there. And so as a consequence of that, you can kind of see that we have yeah, this kind of dry bed. Now what's interesting is that this is actually maybe perhaps the oldest canal ever found. No one knows who made this, but I want to show you something interesting. So if we kind of follow this a little bit, you can see that it's actually it's quite long. It's not a small, we see like a little tiny bit of a bend here. You can see also very clearly, right, still a lot of like things growing in there, while the rest of the area is very arid. We're in the middle of the desert here, and you can clearly see this path, right? Also here it's kind of probably covered underneath a lot of sand, but you can clearly see this kind of straight line where there are a lot of you know, where's a lot of stuff there still growing. We can kind of see here it almost looks like maybe a river bed or something like that, but then it kind of goes up again. And then we can see again that if we go here, we see again this pretty you know, pronounced sides that are very clearly showing that there, you know, was a canal there. We see like a few single trees here, and if we keep going, you can see again here, for example, quite clearly this kind of banks, right, similar to what we saw on the Suez Canal, only this is about 40 meters, so it's about the average width of like an average canal that we would make today. And for the observant among you, of course, you're already noticing that I'm going for quite a while, right? Like I'm moving already for quite a while, and sometimes it's kind of hard to see, but I'm moving in a straight line, and you can see again here that we can see those banks, even though they're quite covered under a lot of desert sand. Here you can see it again. I'm just following in the straight. You can see again here quite clearly that once upon a time there were some banks there. Again here you can kind of see where, you know, just going in a straight line, just kind of following this. Sometimes it meanders just a tiny bit, but you can, you know, especially here you can see quite clearly that it's kind of following a path, right? And you see here again some trees growing just right inside there. Now for the observant wolves among you, you're probably saying to yourself, okay, Floor, this canal that you're showing, you just told us that the Suez Canal is about 120 kilometers. I don't know how long we've been going for so far. We're still going. And of course, when I pull my mouse here, I'm probably moving about like 3, 4, 5 kilometers. So I can tell you we're actually kind of nearing the length of the Suez Canal, and this is still going pretty much in an exactly straight line. Here again we see some trees kind of growing. You can kind of faintly see it going under the sand, and then here we can see a part where, you know, if my internet loads here, that we can see the banks again, you know, pronounced quite clearly. And if we continue just in a straight line, here again you can see it really quite clearly. And remember, we started more than 100 kilometers back, and here it is again, more or less in a straight line. You can see again here trees and stuff kind of growing inside of this former canal that is so old that nobody knows who created this. And if we keep going and keep going, here you can see, like again, very clearly this very pronounced kind of canal bed with kind of stuff growing in it. Let me zoom out a little bit so we can go a little bit faster, because this thing is actually really long. And well, here again you can see the line. See, we're going into real desert, but you can see that there's stuff growing more or less in a straight line underneath here. Here we're going underneath a lot of sand, but again you can see here clearly some trees or some foliage, and if we go a little bit further, we can see again this kind of banks in the rock that are kind of cutting through everything. And you know, no one knows when for the last time there were people here doing any like mega earthworks, right? So that's kind of interesting. Now here we go under a ton of desert, right? So you can clearly see if I zoom in a little bit, like it's just desert, right? It's as if like a ton of water or you know, something like that went through here, and you could think, okay, we lost it here, it's disappeared. But then when we just follow in a straight line, here we pick it up again, and it makes a little bit of a bend, and you can literally see like little trees and little stuff sort of growing in there. And if we keep moving again more or less in a straight line, we can see that this goes towards another place. So you can see kind of two of them here, but here in a straight line, water or something like that kind of blew through, and we can see clearly this line in, if it's bedrock or I don't know, and we see again trees growing there, as if there's still maybe some water there in a straight line moving there underneath the desert. And I mean, we're moving well beyond the length of the Suez Canal here. And if we keep going, let's just keep going for a little bit more. So we're just kind of following the desert sand here. And again, like if I lose it a bit, here, look at this. Just a straight line of trees. Let me actually orient us a little bit more again, going towards this, so it's easier for me to keep a straight line. And if I just follow this again, go to the desert, even here, like in the middle of the desert, you can still see a few little trees here in that right line, right? Now, I think I'm kind of making my point, right? You see that this is this very, very long, more or less straight line canal in the middle of the desert. And what's interesting is if I zoom out here a little bit, and if I just keep following this thing, like in you know, more or less follow that same sort of straight line that I've been following, then eventually we get here a circular thing of about the size that Plato described. And I actually drew in Google a straight line from more or less the center of this through this canal, and it's about 220 kilometers, a straight line running from this underneath the desert to this particular line here, which quite clearly used to be a coastline. So that's, if you ask me, a canal looks like it was made by someone in the middle of the Sahara Desert, running from this massive thing to where the ocean used to start. Have a good night, sea wolves. See you in the next episode. Ciao, ciao.